Hi everybody, here's a video that provides you guys with an overview of prompting. For this video, our objectives and our agenda are going to be one and the same. So we are going to define prompting. We're going to talk about the different prompts and the hierarchy of prompts. We're going to talk about some methods to allow you guys to fade prompts out. And then we're going to talk about differential reinforcement and how to use that with regards to prompting. So what are prompts? Prompts are an antecedent stimulus that is added to a learning situation in order to increase the probability of a correct response. So if you present an SD and the child does not engage in the correct response, you can add in a prompt. So you can add a prompt to the discriminative stimulus in order to increase the probability that the kid will respond correctly. Prompts are not something that are typically in the natural environment. So in your learning situation, these are things that you add to the discriminative stimulus. And so prompts are antecedent interventions. Remember, when we look at our ABCs of behavior, the discriminative stimulus is your antecedent. So you're going to add a prompt to the discriminative stimulus. So you're doing this before the behavior occurs to increase the probability that the kid will respond correctly. When you do prompting, you want to make sure that you use a prompt that already occasions the response. So if the kid can echo you, then an echoic prompt would be great. So making sure that your prompt is successful before you use it. If the kid does not have echoics, then you might have to teach echoics. So things like that. Once again, the prompt does not occur naturally in the situation. So this is something that you're adding to the learning situation to set your kids up for success, which you always want to do. You do this because it allows the kid to it allows reinforcement for the correct response. So, if you don't use prompts and you keep presenting the child and the kid keeps engaging in the incorrect response, they're not going to contact reinforcement. The whole learning session is going to get really frustrating for you and for them, and it just slows momentum down substantially. So adding in the prompt, setting your kid up for success, allowing them, increasing the probability that they'll engage in the correct response, contacting that reinforcement, and moving that momentum forward in the session, and making it really fun and more enjoyable for you and the kid. It also makes teaching or training more efficient. If you just, use trial and error and wait for them to engage in the correct response, you might be waiting a long time. So adding in a prompt, having them increasing the probability that they'll engage in their correct response, and then fading that prompt out has been shown in literature to result in a lot less learning trials to teach a skill as opposed to just trial and error in general. So this makes teaching or training more efficient, and that they learn the skills faster when you use prompting. So we have a couple different types of prompts. We have two main categories. We have response prompts, and this is when the behavior of another person evokes the desired response in the presence of the discriminative stimulus. So another person is administering the prompt that evokes the desired response. We have a couple different types of response prompts. We have verbal, and this is when the teacher or the therapist or whoever is providing the prompts is either saying the instruction again or describing what the person should do. We have gestural prompts, and this is when you might make a slight gesture, so a point to the correct stimulus or an eye gaze, something like that. You make some gesture to kind of give the kid a hint that SD is the correct one. You have modeling, where you actually engage in the skill to show them the correct response. Now with modeling, the kid has to be able to imitate. So if you have a really low functioning kid with autism or a really early learner that doesn't have imitation, then you might have to teach imitation before you do a modeling prompt. So with modeling, imitation is a prerequisite skill. And then there are physical prompts, where you actually physically guide the person to engage in the correct response. The other category of prompts are what we call stimulus prompts. And this is when it involves some change in a stimulus. So you increase the intensity of the stimulus. You change the shape, the size, the color. You know, if you're teaching maybe the color green and you have 3 green circles and you have a red circle, a green circle, and a blue circle, you might make the green circle really big in size, increase the salience, so it's very clear which of the 3 circles are colored green. We have 2 types of stimulus prompts. So we have within stimulus prompts, and that is when you change something in the actual discriminative stimulus. So you change the intensity of the color, the size of the discriminative stimulus, something like that. And then we have extra stimulus, and that's when you add something to the discriminative stimulus. Oh, sorry. Then we have extra stimulus, and that's when you actually add something to the discriminative stimulus. So, for example, whenever you guys were teaching, maybe you were trying to figure out, you know, right hand, left hand, you might have put a little L on your left hand. So that would be an extra stimulus prompt, and that you added something to your left hand to make it more likely that you would identify that your left hand is actually your left hand. Okay, so let's look at response prompts. So with response prompts, typically response prompts are intrusive. You know, when you get into, especially your physical prompting, you are actually getting in there and taking the kids' hands and having them engage in the correct response, either pointing to the correct picture or clapping if you ask them to. So these are intrusive, and we talk about them with regards to a hierarchy. And so this is an example of a prompting hierarchy. And I wanted to point out that sometimes, depending upon, you know, who you guys talk to, who you work with, this hierarchy might be a little bit different. So some people have visual, gestural, verbal, and then modeling. And so it just kind of depends. So this is the hierarchy I like to work with. This is the one that I was essentially trained on, or that I typically use. So that's what I have in this video. But realize these first 3 might be in a little different order depending upon your school district or the BCBA that you might work with. Usually these ones at the bottom are pretty much always the last ones, the modeling and then the full physical, or the partial physical and then full physical. But these ones at the top might change in order slightly. But basically at the very top, they're the least invasive, which is your visual prompting. And then you have the verbal prompt, and then you have the gesture prompt, the modeling, the partial physical, and full physical. So when you go down, they get more and more and more invasive. And then on the other side, they get less independent. So these prompting hierarchies that are at the very top, so for instance, a visual prompt where you would either if you want kids to identify a certain picture or item, you would put it really close to the child. Or you might have a picture of what the child's supposed to do. Those are, in this hierarchy, the least invasive and they allow the most independence from the learner. And as you go down, they get more invasive and less independent. So when you get down to your full physical, most invasive, you're actually taking the kids' hands and having them engage in the correct response. And therefore, it requires the least amount of independence within the child. You always want to use the least intrusive prompt. So if you're teaching a new skill and your child doesn't need full physical prompt, they're good with modeling, then you want to start at modeling. You don't want to just start from the very bottom and go up. If they don't need full physical, you don't want to use it. You want to use the least intrusive. If they're good with just a verbal prompt, use a verbal prompt, and then fade the verbal prompt out. So you want them to be successful, but you want to use the least intrusive prompt necessary. Okay, here's just another example of the different types of prompt and that prompt hierarchy. So for this example, you're saying clap hands. and then you want the child to clap their hands. So the least intrusive is at the very bottom. That's going to be your verbal. So you're going to use your voice to direct the child. You say clap hands and then tell the child to move his hands together until they touch. Higher up on the hierarchy is a gestural. So you would, this is when you point to correct response, motion to the area, things like that. So you would say clap your hands and then point to the child's hands to give them a hint that they need to clap their hands. If that doesn't work, you can go to modeling. So modeling, you're actually demonstrating the correct response. So you say clap your hands and then you clap your hands while saying clap hands. With modeling, you typically engage in the correct response, and you also provide instructions as to what you're doing when you are modeling the correct response. And then the physical prompts, you can have partial physical. So you provide some physical contact to help the child engage in the response. So when you say clap hands, you might gently pick up the child's hands and kind of partially physically prompt them and then allow them to do the rest on their own. And then you have the most intrusive, which is your full physical. So you're going to physically guide the hands or the body to perform the correct response. So you say clap your hands, and you take both of the kids' hands and guide both of them and clap the child's hands for them. So that's an example of all the different prompts in that prompt hierarchy. I mentioned visual prompts a little bit earlier. They were one of the most least intrusive prompts, and this is just an example of visual prompts. You can have pictures to tell the kid what they're supposed to do. You can have routine prompts as well, visual prompts that show the kid the morning routine or afternoon routine. Things like that are also very popular prompting methods. All right, your stimulus prompts, remember we had within, and this is going to be you are altering some aspect of the discriminative stimulus. You're making it more salient, you're making it bigger, you're positioning it closer to the student. So in this example, this is a teacher an instructional session. The teacher's over here presenting two pieces of fruit, two pictures of fruit to the student, and they want the student to give me banana. And so what they've done is they've placed the banana really close to the student, so it makes it very clear which picture is the banana. And so this is what we call a positional prompt. When the teacher would say, give me the grapes, the banana would come back and the grapes would go really close to the student. You can also make the picture bigger. So the grape picture can be small or normal size, and the banana picture can be a lot bigger. So it makes it really clear that that's the picture of the banana. Here is a practicing writing their letters, and we have a prompt that the kid can trace, and it's a very clear prompt. It's not faded or anything like that, so it's very salient that that's the A that they need to trace. And then if you guys have seen these worksheets, and we'll talk about fading in a little bit, it'll fade out, the salience will fade out until it's either a dotted line or there's nothing there and the kid is engaging in writing a lowercase a. The extra stimulus prompts are when you add something extra to the discriminative stimulus. So if you want the learner to read the written word cat, and they can't read it yet, but they do see a cat and they can say cat in the presence of a cat, then you might put that picture of the cat behind the written word, and that would prompt them to say cat. Same thing, if they see a book, an actual book, and they can say book, but they can't read the word book, you can put that picture of the actual word book behind it. All right, with prompts, if you implement a prompt, remember these are something that are added to the learning trial. You need to fade your prompts. So you want to gradually remove the prompts, so that way the behavior comes under stimulus control of the actual discriminative stimulus and not the prompt. So when we talk about fading, we're talking about the gradual elimination of a prompt. And so the purpose of it, if we get more into our technical language, is to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the naturally occurring SD. When you have a prompt, typically the correct behavior is under control of the prompt. So you want to fade that prompt out so that the behavior is under stimulus control of the actual discriminative stimulus. And therefore, the behavior now occurs in the presence of the discriminative stimulus and not the prompt. This is really, really important. If you do not fade your prompts, then it typically results in what we call prompt dependence. And you don't want prompt dependence. So prompt dependence is the child is just going to, you'll present the SD and the child is just going to wait for you to engage in the prompt, and then they're going to engage in the correct response. And so they never learn to actually do it independently or learn to do it in the presence of the SD. They always just wait for the prompt. Let's see, if you had, say we were doing our clap hands example and you were doing a gesture prompt. So you would say clap hands, and then you would kind of point to the kid's hands. Well, if that prompt results in prompt dependence, they're not going to clap their hands when you say clap hands. They're going to wait for you to gesture, and then they're going to clap their hands. And they're essentially going to be dependent on the prompt. So you don't want that to happen, and that's why it's really important that you fade those prompts out. So let's talk about an example of how you would fade prompts. So say you have Miss Smith, and she presents this flashcard to little Susie, the written word cat, and she wants Susie to say cat, but Susie doesn't say it. So you guys can think, what would be an appropriate prompt? And in this instance, it might be a verbal prompt. So Miss Smith shows Susie the flashcard with the written word cat, and Miss Smith might say cat, and then Susie will say cat. So if Susie can echo Miss Smith, then this would be a really good type of prompt to use. Now, after Susie is reliably saying cat, after Miss Smith prompts it, then you want to make sure Miss Smith fades that prompt out. And so one thing you can do is Miss Smith can show her the flashcard, but not say the whole word cat. She can start to fade out that verbal prompt. So she can say "ka," and when Susie says cat, and then she can fade it out to where she's not saying cat anymore, and Susie is just responding to the original SD or the written word cat. So with fading, or with prompt fading, there are, of course, ABA systematic. So we have 6 different systematic ways to fade out prompts. The first one is what we call most to least prompting. And that was the example that I just gave you guys with Miss Smith and Susie. So you provide the most amount of assistance. So at first, Miss Smith said the whole word cat, and that's prompted Susie to say the word cat. And then you're going to decrease that assistance gradually. When the child doesn't need a lot of assistance, you pull back and you pull back, you'll pull back until the child is responding independently. This can be within prompting types. So the example with Miss Smith was within a verbal prompt. So you can have the verbal prompt and then you can pull back the assistance on the verbal prompt. So she said cat at the beginning and then "ka" and then nothing. Or it can be across response types. So you might start with, if you're teaching, clap hands, you might start with the full physical prompt and then fade back to the partial physical, then modeling, then gestural, then verbal, and then the kid will be engaging in the response independently. You typically want to use most to least prompting for less advanced learners. So if you have more of a low functioning learner, things like that. And then also when you first teach a new skill, a lot of times this is what's called errorless teaching, because you're providing lots of assistance so you ensure that the kid is engaging in the correct response, and then you pull it back. So it decreases errors when you're first teaching a new skill. The second type of strategy is what we call graduated guidance, and this refers to our physical prompts. So, when you have a physical prompt, you want to fade out that physical prompt because these are the most intrusive, and so you want to fade them out as quickly as possible. And so when you fade out your physical prompt, you might start with that full physical. So you take both of the child's hands and you clap them together. Then you might take both of the child's hands and put them together, but have the child clap. Then you might fade it back where you just lift up the child's hands, and then you might just touch the child's hands for them to clap, and then you fade out, and then you can go to modeling and things like that. So that's called graduated guidance. The third strategy is what we call least and most prompting. So this is when you're going to start with the least amount of assistance, and you're going to gradually increase it across trials if the learner needs it. So you might say, clap hands and see if the child can respond independently. If they don't, then you might provide either a verbal prompt or a gestural prompt. If they still don't clap their hands, then you would model it. If they still don't clap their hands, then full physical. So a little bit opposite from most to least. Most to least, you start with the most assistance. Least to most, you give them an opportunity to typically respond independently, and then you provide assistance as needed. Least to most, you typically use with more advanced learners who don't need that physical prompt. So if you have older learners, more advanced learners, you can typically go with least to most prompting, and it can be successful. You can also do what we call a prompt delay. And so this is a time delay between the natural occurring SD and the prompt. So it's a little different than your least to most and most to least. So you typically have, one prompting method. So let's take our verbal. Let's go back to Miss Smith and Susie. She holds up the flashcard with the written word cat. And at the first trial, Miss Smith will hold up the flashcard and say cat. And then after that, Miss Smith will still use the prompt cat, but she's going to put a time delay between her showing the flashcard and her saying cat. So she might wait 2 seconds. First trial is always an immediate prompt. So she holds up the flashcard and says cat. The next trial, she might hold up the flashcard, wait 2 seconds, and then say cat. Then she might hold the flashcard, wait 4 seconds, and then say cat. And then she'll hold up the flashcard, wait 6 seconds, and then say cat. So you're increasing the time delay between the SD and the actual prompt. The fifth strategy is what we call stimulus fading. So over time, you're going to either remove that external stimulus or decrease that stimulus dimension. So if you made the color green really intense to teach the color green, you would fade that out to a normal color. We talked about that position prompt where you put the stimulus really close to the kid. You would bring it back to gradually bring it back to where it's in line with the other stimuli. If you guys ever use flashcards, so we talked about reinforcement. You have reinforcement. On the other side, you have the definition. So this would be an extra stimulus prompt, and so eventually you're going to be able to say the definition in the presence of this word. So you're going to fade this out. Okay, and then our last strategy, here's an example of our stimulus fading. So you might be teaching the color green, and so you make the green stimulus really big, and eventually you want to decrease it so it's the same size as your other stimuli. Or you might be prompting, you might want the kid to learn lowercase letters. They know they're uppercase, but not their lowercase. So you have all uppercase, and you want to fade it out to where their name is in all lowercase. And then here's some other examples. We talked about that letter A earlier. That's really salient. You want to decrease the salience, and then I don't have the full worksheet on here, but it decreases enough to where there's no A, and they're writing the A. Here are the examples where there's actual item behind the written word ball, and you can fade that out until it's not there anymore. Same with the cup here. Same with the milk carton right here. You want the kid to read the written word milk, so you draw the picture of the carton with the word milk and then fade out the actual carton. And then this is an example of reading the word blue. So if the kid knows the color blue, you can write the word in blue and then fade out the color blue to where it's just a normal black ink. The last one is what we call a transfer control procedure. The last one is called the stimulus shape transformation. So you can use an initial shape that will prompt the correct response and then transform that shape to the natural stimulus. So if you look at this, there's a bat and a ball. Those are two items. So you can say, 2, and then you can transform it to the letter 2. This one right here, you can say they can name car, and then you can transform it to where it's actually the written word car. Right here, they might say umbrella. You can fade it out to where it's the written word U. This one's cat. You can fade it out to where they have a C and things like that. Here's another example. They might be able to count these, and then you're going to start to fade out the prompt and enter in the actual numbers and you fade those out, make the numbers bigger until the prompt is gone and the numbers are really big. And same here, you have this prompt here and you can just simply fade it out until you just have the numbers. All right, last thing in this video I wanted to talk about is differential reinforcement of unprompted responses. So you want to provide, when you start prompting and you start fading out those prompts, you want to provide really powerful reinforcers when the response occurs without a prompt or the less intrusive prompt. And then less powerful reinforcers for prompted responses. And then eventually you want to eliminate reinforcement for prompted responses. But for example, if we go back to our clapping hands and maybe you started most of these prompting and you started with full physical and now you're at modeling. So now we're at modeling. You typically want to provide lots of reinforcement when they're on this less intrusive prompt and not as much reinforcement with the physical prompting. So you say clap your hands, you model it, the kid does it, you say yay, they get their token, powerful reinforcers. If they don't do it and you have to go to partial physical, you might say good job, but you don't provide those really powerful reinforcers. And then if you have to go to full physical, then you would just proceed to the next trial. If the kid is all the way down here and he's starting to respond independently, you want to give super powerful reinforcers for an independent response, less reinforcers for a prompted one, or even no reinforcement for a prompted one. And this helps with prompt dependence because they learn, hey, I can respond independently and get something that I really, really want. So it increases the likelihood that they will engage in those independent responses, which is what you want. Okay, so now let's put everything that we talked about in this video together. So we're going to talk about how to prompt, how to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the discriminative stimulus, and how to use differential reinforcement. So first thing you want to do is to always get the learner's attention. Make sure that they're paying attention to you. You want to present the SD. So for example, clap hands, prompt the correct response depending upon where you are on the hierarchy. Say you're on the full physical prompt, you're going to do the full physical prompt and reinforce the correct behavior. So when you're just teaching, if they make a response that's prompt or make a response to the prompt, you want to reinforce that behavior. And then you want to start transferring stimulus control. So you want to start fading out that prompt. Go to that partial physical, go to the modeling, and then the gesture, and then the verbal. And when you're doing that, that's when you want to differentially reinforce responses that occur at lower levels of prompting. So if you're at a gesture, you want to really provide powerful reinforcers for that gesture and not so powerful reinforcers for the modeling or the full physical. And then when you move up your prompt hierarchy, or down your prompt hierarchy to where correct responses are beginning to occur without the prompt, then you want to only reinforce those unprompted responses. Your goal is to have an unprompted response because that means you've faded out the prompt and the response is occurring under the original discriminative stimulus, which is what you want. All right, guys, so in this video, we talked about prompts, response prompts, stimulus prompts. We talked about the prompt hierarchy with regards to your response prompts. We talked about the different fading techniques, so there are 6 of them. And then we talked about differential reinforcement and how to use differential reinforcement when you're moving through the prompt hierarchy. So, all right, guys, thank you all so much for listening. If you have any questions, then please email me. All right, thanks, guys.